David Bohm Seminars Series 1, Saturday, November 12th, 1988, Ojai, California.
Yes, now we discussed a number of things last night. Would anybody want to raise any questions about that first? Or was it all?
I had a lot of filth last night.
Not that we know it all.
What?
Said it's not that we know it all.
Well, either you know it all or you don't know enough to ask a question. Yes, well, we're discussing the whole question of thought and how it's created these problems, and then the thought-felt process working mechanically and automatically. And and one of the problems is time. You see, we said that the ordinary way of going about things, you see, well, before that, perhaps we could say you might begin to wonder, as some people have, whether anything could be done at all if it's all caught up in this thought-felt process, whether we could even begin to look at anything. But see, we have to be careful here to say that there are assumptions the thought makes about itself which are contribute to its structure, you see, to the way it works. And one of them, we discussed a number of them, like fragmentation, or that thoughts and felts are separate. These are false assumptions. Or that we could say it's all caught up in it, but you see, that's an assumption, right? We don't know that it's all caught up. We know quite a bit is caught up. But you see, you have to be careful not to assume that, because that assumption can block you, right? It will change the structure of thought, right? We'll come to that later quite a bit, that assumptions about all can be very dangerous in this area. And so we don't know that it's all caught up. If it were all caught up, then I think we might as well give up, right? However, from moment to moment, it may not be caught up, and without your noticing it, perhaps if you just get interested in something, then it may not be caught up, right? You see, we could discuss all that. Later interest is based on a sense of value, and if value gives energy, as we discussed last year, and therefore it could be in any moment that you are not in it for a little bit, therefore beginning to look more deeply, right? So, see, the thing is, in this whole business, the assumptions that thought makes about itself are going to be the key factor. And we have to bring them to light, right? Some of them, anyway. Now, see, then we discussed this question of time, and saying one of the assumptions we make is that in order to do something, we project an aim, and we take time to achieve it. You see, by project an end, and we have end and means. We project an end and find the means to achieve it. Right? That's what we do in all life, all practical work, all science, and everything. And then naturally we start to apply that to the mind, saying, suppose we have a problem in the mind, and we say we want it to work better. We should have better feelings, or we should have better thoughts. We should do things better, and we try to project an end, saying that's what we want, and we try to find the means to do it by making a resolution, or using willpower, or by a technique, or by some other method. And I said that is a problem. It won't work here because the whole process is there in the memory, ready to work at any moment. Right? You haven't got time to do anything about it. At least that's the way it looks. Right? That suppose that you have had a reaction, your thought is already, the felts are already demanding of thought that it should produce a nicer state, a more comfortable state, right? And the thoughts are already making demands on the felts. You see that, for example, if you have if you're thinking of something that makes you uncomfortable, then there's a desire, a feeling that subtly you're starting already to twist it to make yourself more comfortable, right? You're engaging in wishful thinking. And vice versa, you may decide by thought that you should have better feelings. You see, for example, you may find that you have feelings of hostility towards somebody and say, well, I really shouldn't have them, I have another kind. And you see, the thought tries takes the end of better feelings and tries to achieve it. But it doesn't work because the thoughts are already, the thought with which you're doing it is already distorting the whole thing. You see, you might say, why should you have different feelings from the ones you've got, right? Say, for example, a simpler case would be, suppose somebody feels he wants to make war on somebody, right? Well, he may find he gets friendly feelings toward those people. He talks to them and he says, no, I've got to stop that, right? Mustn't have friendly feelings or we can't have this war, right? So then he stirs up bad feelings by thinking, right? That's an old custom. You see, for example, primitive people, so-called, will have a war dance. They say they know they can't go out and kill people by just a cold like that. So they have to have a war dance to stir themselves up and get the right feelings to, perhaps they tell how bad these other people are and how they deserve to be killed and so on. And they build it up and then finally they can do it, right? That happens all the time. They whip up feelings with speeches here, with music, with shouts, clamors, and I'll imagine the Nuremberg rally as an extreme case. So you see, thought starts to try to control feelings, right? And feelings try to control thoughts. And that's already starting, you see, in a false way, because it's all on the memory already. It's sort of a program, like a computer. And therefore, we don't really, in some sense, it looks as if we don't really have time to get into that. You see, the minute you start, you're in it, you see. So the idea of projecting a goal to control these feelings or to control those thoughts is not going to work. Right? Now that's totally different from anything, in the ordinary practical sphere, the technical or scientific sphere, right? And but our whole tradition doesn't recognize that, doesn't acknowledge it, right? And therefore we have a wrong thought about thought, which is that we can do all that. And as long as we believe we can do all that, we will inevitably try to do it, right? Now that belief is quite strong. It doesn't change just because of what I say, right? We have to go into that. When we discuss this thing, you may say, I say these things and they make sense, but everything seems to remain the same. Is that right? And then you can say another thing you've commonly said, well, that's all intellectual, it's not the real stuff. Now that's another explanation of it, you see. But I say that there's more to it than that. That may be correct, what I've said so far, but there's much more which we haven't seen, which is keeping us caught up in the old pattern, right? It's not just, we haven't really come in contact with those pressures which are, pushing us into doing this all the time, habitually, right?
It seems to be possible to perceive this. We can perceive feelings or felt or something, and we can perceive the thought process if we don't try too hard. We just watch it. And I'm not here trying to create a pixie perceiver or some kind of an inner genie, the self, the I, the me, that does all this, because it doesn't. You said yesterday that these inner things happen. They're machinery. They occur, and we don't. it's very important, I think, to have as few pixies in the machinery as possible, the I's and the me's and the selves and things, messing all this up. But we can perceive it, and in the act of perceiving it seems to change something. How about that?
Yes.
Excuse me. Once you realize that the whole idea of thinking is illusionary and delusionary, like you've been saying, there is a state different that you feel it somehow deeply. You may not see all the ramifications of it, but the thing is to be able to see the problem in a like an infant. Well, it's a fact that it can be done, because in infancy you don't know language, you don't know. How does the child see new things? How does he learn? He can't tell trees or straight edges. He learns this when he's 3, 6, 8, 12 months old, whatever. So it's a fact that there is another state that can perceive something, thinking, different from what it is deeply. So there is a way to do it.
Well, there is a possibility of doing it, yes.
But you may not see, as you just said, you may see parts of your thinking and your felts and your feelings and your thoughts, but you may not see all the complex depth of it. But once you perceive from a different state, it seems like a new part within you, then it sort of goes. The whole thing goes.
Yes. Now the question then is how. See, suppose you perceive it and somebody else doesn't, for the sake of argument. Then, how the other person will ask, "How can I perceive it too?" You see that there's a danger there of saying I have the goal of perceiving it that way, right? You see that there's a constant. The thought process is constantly slipping in to the same pattern in the very attempt to get out of it.
Well, it's like you said yesterday, you're going down a road and you realize it's a wrong turn. Well, you don't go there, you go the other way. And if you see pieces of your own inner problem, you're thinking, if you can actually see it like a road, then you won't go in there.
That's
It's
true, yes,
very
but
clear.
the trouble is that we're talking about the person who doesn't see it, you see. Suppose we said there's this fog which is generated by the thought-felt process, and he isn't seeing clearly which road is which. I mean, he gets a vague swirling vision, a fog, right? And he sees a road coming up and another road, and he doesn't quite know what to do, you see. Now, he doesn't quite know where he's going, right? And what direction he's going. So, and now you see, somehow we have to begin to look into this process which is creating all this sort of fog and confusion. We've got to see that too, you see. That's what I'm suggesting. Now, see, there is this danger. I would just like to call attention to it again, because I think it has been common, that somebody else, if A sees all this, which you say, and B doesn't, that B will very easily slip into projecting the goal of seeing it too, imagining roughly what it would mean, and just projecting more of the same, right? Now, therefore, there has to be a sort of hesitation, a sort of tentativeness, right? Sort of feeling we're not going to plunge into it too fast, right? Because we might easily just slip into the same old thing again. So to feel out where, how we fall into that trap, saying the habit of thinking that way is so pervasive and so deep that even when we try to get out of it, we keep it up very often. Now, that has been one of the problems in this whole area, right?
The problem is B can't see it, and through his thinking, he has to see it through affection.
Yeah, but suppose he has no affection, you see, he feels. You see, the point is, then he would make the goal of having affection. You see, if the falling into the trap again. So he would say, I haven't got an affection. Life has treated me very badly, and it's all gone.
Produce a recipe for it.
What?
Well, there's nothing you can do.
No, I'm not sure of that, you see. I don't accept the statement that I have no, even that he has no affection. He may feel that he has none or think he has none, right? You see, I'm trying to say that could be another trap, saying I feel I have no affection, or at least not that much. But you see, then I say, well, that also may be a trap of thought by saying that's a thought that I have no affection, right? But you see, somewhere it slips out of your grasp, you see. You keep on going into this from one thing to another. To the person who is caught, it's slipping out of his grasp. Somehow he falls, and without noticing it, he falls back into the old pattern. Is that clear where the problem is? And I think this is common to everybody, and it requires, that we should go a little bit slowly and sort of try to feel out that there's a deeper pattern there, that even in the attempt to solve this thing, we keep on going on with it, you see. And in fact, that's been the rule all along, that all the attempts of the human race to solve these problems have generally made them worse. Like religion says, love one another and be good and so on. And people, even in the name of such principles, have engaged in vast slaughter, and they've slowly slipped into it. They didn't do it on purpose, right, out of vicious and evil intentions. But they slowly slipped into one thing after another, which led them into it. You see that? Because thought slips in from behind, it creeps in from behind without you noticing it. The thought-felt process, we'll call it. Now, it's a very subtle thing, and you see, one point that has been made is that it's the technical, practical thought which slips into trying to control tacitly the other kind. Right? And there seems to be no dividing line you can draw. You say you only use it for technology, but you have to use that kind of thought for yourself too sometimes. And I gave the example last night of, you see, that thought is based on memory, right? We said. But without memory, you would be nothing, you see. That, like there was the case of this man who lost the ability to produce new memories because of brain damage. And he could remember some older things, and he simply couldn't maintain any line of action or thought or anything for more than about a minute, and perhaps even not that much. And he could even write down that he had been doing such and such a thing, and a few minutes later he wouldn't believe what he had written. Now, every time he met his wife, it was for the first time. He said, "This is the first time. You see, I haven't been conscious. This is the first time I've been conscious," and so on. He couldn't do anything really. He could not trust himself. He could not have walked down out of the house to go anywhere or anything. So, so that memory. A certain kind of memory is needed, even like now, to be able to discuss this issue or to remember that you're interested in this question.
Is there a suggestion in what you're saying that maybe in some way thought, in a deep subliminal way, may, say, be on the top shelf in there somewhere, and if that person can't feel the thing with affection, maybe this thought, this idea that you're communicating in dialogue, that someday maybe you're walking in the forest or somewhere and it's working and something will hit you?
It may, yes. You see, I'm trying to say that there are various blocks, and looking at this thing like this may remove some of them. It doesn't guarantee anything, right? And something else may combine with something else, and the whole of life, right? I'm not saying that doing this is. See, we would get into the trap of saying we have the end. The end in view is what we are all going to produce a change. Right? The means are, well, we're going to talk about it, discuss it, try to feel it, try to be affectionate, and so on. You see, that would be the mistake, right? The trap.
Well, don't have an answer. Project it, just let it be what it's going to
Yeah,
be.
so we're just listening and working if you're interested. And it may do something, it may not. Now, if we insist that it's going to do something, that will be part of the same old story, right? Now, you see, because we say whatever we do, it's got to be useful in society, it's got to fulfill a goal and end. Now here we say we have an empty space. The word leisure means an empty space in its room. And the word school also in Greek meant a place of leisure, so a place where there was an empty space, where people could sort of ponder and look at things. And now the philosophers established schools, you see. So so we have a kind of empty space here over this weekend, we hope. And we're not trying to do anything. but we're just looking at this and considering it. And it may work, it may not work, you see. It may do something, it may be, it all combines also with what happens when you go out. Right? Now, now let's see, where were we? I was coming back to this question that memory seems to be necessary even psychologically to maintain your integrity as a being, you see, as a person. You can't just say keep memory, have memory only for outside things and not for your inside. You see, so we don't quite see where to draw the dividing line between that thought which has purpose and memory in it. See, this man who had brain damage could not maintain a purpose, and then he was not really a full human being, right? He couldn't really do much of anything. So the point is that you can't say outside or inside very clearly. There's no sharp dividing line, but somewhere there's a kind of thought that isn't working, thought felt that isn't right. You see, in a certain area, thought felt works okay. You get these felts which tell you something is urgent or something is good or bad and so on, and they're really okay, right? Now, then here inside somewhere it goes wrong. It leads to self-deception. It leads to this false division of thought and emotion. And we don't quite see the dividing line, right? Now, to establish a dividing line without knowing that there is one, maybe there isn't one, you see, but still we must face this question. I think here there's an area of confusion, you see. We don't quite know how to put the question, right? Saying where this practical technical thought means an end, which is so pervasive. Where shall we draw the line? You don't seem to say exactly, right? Maybe there's no line. Maybe we've got to go about it another way. Maybe we can't draw a line.
Appears to be an integrated process for both.
Yeah.
I would suggest that it's built into the organism, the human organism. When the organism was developing, it used memory to assure its survival by recognizing dangerous beasts or poisonous plants and then protecting itself against those things. And on a psychological level, it seems like we've taken the attitude that any action to defend the sense of self, the ego, which would be parallel to defending the body on a physical level, is somehow a mistake. And
what you're saying is that the five senses used, if you go back man's history, evolutionary far enough, a tiger is there, he knows to run. He forms a concept from all his inputs, and if there's a fruit on the tree, he knows to eat it.
right.
And somewhere with that mechanism, which is conceptualization of his surrounding, which has been shown to be in error or proximate, he does the same thing with his inner thinking psychologically, and a self is formed in the same way, and it is also approximate and error. It's sort of, he's taken the outer world, his environment, inwardly, and it's like it's sort of, when man maybe began to draw on caves or things, he became aware of himself for 80,000 years.
Yeah, but you can't say it was totally wrong to be aware of yourself, because in some sense it's necessary. You see, it's very hard to draw the line between the kind of awareness of self that's necessary and the kind that is destructive. You see, that kind that begins to feed on itself and deceive itself. You see, that's what we want to be doing in this weekend, to make it very clear. You see, I hope that we could get clarity here. And you see, I think clarity requires passion. In other words, it's not purely intellectual. And that you will not attain clarity if you go about it in a half-hearted way, right? Now, the emotions have to be behind it as well, right? But they're implicit. I'll be coming to that, you see. So we have the need for some, at this point and probably other points that come up, the need for greater clarity, that we are in. The culture has left us in a confused situation. And we cannot see quite how to clear this up about where we should be aware of the self, or where we begin to make a false step, right?
One self is he looks at his own body, his foot and hand, and says, well, there I am, and it's like the world out here. but he's thinking inwardly. There's a concept of self there which is different from me looking at my hand or my foot. That's a different level of self.
Yes, and it's not clear exactly how much of that is wrong or right. You see, there's somewhere it's very badly wrong, but it's not clear where to make the dividing line, because you say, I've got to think about things, and I've got to remind myself of things, and so to a certain extent I've got to do that, right? And now somewhere I begin to think, I've got to think that I'm great, I'm the greatest, and so on. And, I've got to think I'm good, I've got to think I'm the best, or I've got to defend that image of myself.
It seems that is the problem that, well, I see my foot, and if a snake bites it, I pull it out of the way. There's an entity, it's part of the self.
Mm-hmm.
But my thinking self doesn't see itself through my thinking.
No, it doesn't.
I'm not aware of that self. And
Yeah.
that's the illusion, or that's the mirage, or whatever. I don't know what the words are. But thinking can't see its
That's true.
thinking
Yeah.
self.
That's right. Thinking does not see itself in action.
Yes.
And see that last year we discussed it in terms of self-perception or proprioception. The body is aware of itself as it moves, but thought is not aware of what it's doing. See, for example, thought produces felts, it doesn't know it. Felts produce thoughts, and they don't know it. And therefore, not being aware of what you're doing as you do it is bound to get in trouble. What?
Isn't it possible to have a felt and then watch the thought sneak in from behind?
That's true, yes, it's possible, but it's rather not common, you see. I mean, certainly you should, if you can do it, do it. But I'm saying this is one of the points that in humanity at large, it is very uncommon. See, it is not part of our culture that you should do this, or that it's even possible. And it's not commonly, accepted and so on.
A basic aspect of this inner self, which may give a lot of momentum to the self-deception, is not particular attributes, as you were saying, that I must become great, I must this, I must that, but just the fact that as I project the future, I'm always there, which means it's a certain security that the self will continue.
Yeah, well, that's the same sort of thing. Then I must be secure, you see, saying, I must, just as I must secure my future by storing up grain and other things, and I must also be secure inwardly by storing up whatever I need, right?
Or by continuing to exist.
Or by continuing to exist. I mean, but in some sense you should want to continue to exist, but it slips over into some wrong way of going about it, right?
But it's not just I should want to exist, but virtually everything we do is based on the assumption that I will continue to exist, which may be a deception.
Yes, but I think that there's a problem around the whole question of the self, me, time, and the desire to go on living, which in a way is normal and built into you, and it gets twisted into the desire to continue the self-image, you see. Now,
Wrong conditioning.
but it's the whole culture, again, you see, over thousands, tens of thousands of years, right? So it has been built up through time, and it involves time in a very crucial way. We want to come to that. You see, we've also seen that we've always used time to do everything, and I think one of the mistakes is we're using time to solve this problem. You see, whatever has gone wrong, we say, okay, that's gone wrong. Now we've got to do something, right? But it turns out that what we do is the same wrong thing that we are trying to correct. That's where the real trouble is. You see, not so much to focus on what has gone wrong, because that might clear up fairly quickly if we stop trying to correct it in this wrong way. Do you see? So and that is really one of the things, see what Krishnamurti called becoming, you see, psychological becoming. You're constantly trying to become something better or different by projecting a goal. But you say that you can't because you already are this. Your memory is already, with thoughts and felts, is already making you be this and twisting it up, so that this attempt to become better has no meaning, right? There's no way through this sort of time to change. That is, it doesn't mean that you can't take time in the sense of the clock, but rather the appeal to time as the way of doing it is where the trouble is, right? It may, whatever you're doing may take time, but this inner appeal to time is where the trouble is.
Also, the self-denial interferes a great deal. Because you say I'm becoming, then you're denying what you are, and
That's
you
true,
fall
yeah.
into a very heavy thing of wanting to become even stronger.
Yes, but you see, that's the point. You already are such and such, which is due to your thoughts and felts, which are twisting things up. And in your very effort to become your process is twisted by what you are. You see, therefore there's no time to do anything, right? You see, now that's a paradox, and in a sense, no time to which you can appeal, right? Right? Time may take place and so on, but you can't appeal to it.
Is that the distinction between chronological time and psychological time?
That may be the distinction, yes. You see, there are several words. The word chronos in Greek is a kind of time that we measure like chronometer, and there seems to be the word kairos, which really means the time is ripe, right? And we could say that with regard to this, there is no time for doing this. The time is never ripe for trying to become something. But nevertheless, chronological time keeps on happening, right? So you're not going to sort of get into a mysterious state where the clock stops, or maybe you could get into states where time seems faster or slower. I mean, there are people who have done that, but I'm saying we're not going to say time just stops, right? Now, but there is a succession. Time is the succession, you see. Time is the succession of events and the order of succession. Now, okay, so so we want then to go deeper into the nature of thought, into that stream, the source of the stream, right? Where the difficulties are arising. We've sort of gone a little way further into it now. And we're saying one of the difficulties arising is that our attempt to use time, our usual way of trying to deal with the problem is such that we are doing the very same, and trying to correct our psychological problems, we are just making more psychological problems. If we could manage to stop trying to correct it, that we might be very much better off. But we find it's such a deep habit to keep on using time that it's not so easy to just say stop using time, you see. That's a contradiction. It already is an appeal to psychological time, right? You see, almost everything we do is an implicit appeal to psychological time. Now, now I think let's to go a little deeper. I say that you see, we have thought is far more than we supposed it to be, right? It goes much further. It goes into emotions. It goes into the body. It produces tension. It goes into the chemistry. It goes into time. It goes into industry and goals and technology, and it has all sorts of deeper features. And we would like, therefore, to explore thought a little bit first. You see, saying let's get more familiar with thought, because usually we think thought is just intellectual, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? The intellectual thoughts are a very small part of thought. They're an attempt to make thought rational and logical and so on. Most of it is not, right? Much of it is highly irrational. And so by means of hard work, you can produce some rational thought sometimes. But underneath is something which is not generally so, right? Now, see, the next point is to say a lot of our thought is implicit. You see, implicit, you all know what that means. It literally means enfolded. You see, like, whereas explicit means unfolded, right? So it's folded up inside of us some way. You don't see it, right? Now, when we say this implies that, you mean that something contains that implicitly and it becomes explicit when you say this implies that, right? So a great deal of our thinking consists of making the implicit explicit. As we already have it there, but we make it explicit, right? By words or by images or some way. Now, that's called analysis. You see, analysis, one of its functions is to make and when it's implicit, it's all folded up together. You see, thoughts and felts and all that is all folded up. When it's explicit, they all separate. Now, we may think everything is explicit, and that's why the basis of fragmentation part. We think only of the explicit. But you see, the implicit is everything all together. The thoughts, the felts, and the tensions and everything. Now, a great deal, see, if we say that goes without saying, everybody understands that, and so that means it's implicit, right? Now, we usually, and one of the thoughts about thought, which is that people, that what our culture thinks, has the assumption that only explicit thoughts are effective. Right? So you've got to make them explicit before they do anything. But that's not true. You see, the implicit thoughts are far more effective, generally speaking, than the explicit thoughts.
Explicit thought is representative and based on all these input.
It comes out of them, yes. You see, there's a vast, far more is implicit than you could ever explain, right? You could never explain, bring it out all.
Like a computer program.
Well, a computer, what do you mean?
Well, the complexity of all of the circuits going
Yeah.
and everything to try to explain what's going on instead of just looking at the result
Yeah.
of the printout.
Yes, but even the printout is too detailed. You see, there was a recent article where they turned the printout into a sort of a picture. You see, and you can pick it up very fast. Right? So, they see, all that detail in the printout would be too much to pick up, but it was implicit in the program, and then it became explicit, and then it was put into another explicit form you could pick up. But you see, but there's much more behind thought than merely information, because there's also all the felts, and there's all the state of the body, and there may be something beyond the whole thing which contributes. It may all be floating in a much greater background. So the implicit may go beyond thought altogether, and beyond felt. Right? Intuition, all sorts of words that can be used, you see, but it goes beyond. It just goes more and more unfolded and becomes more and more difficult, less and less conscious, right? You see, so now I say implicit thought is what acts most of the time. You see, if you have something like prejudice, you see, somebody may have an implicit thought, all people of that race are such and such. Right? Now, he's not thinking that all the time. That's there implicitly. If you asked him, he might say, yes, that's so, right? But it's there all the time, right? Now, then along comes somebody who he recognizes a member of that race, and therefore, now it's not that the implicit thought comes out and says, now he says the words, but rather he sees that person according to the implicit thought, or he reacts according to it. He becomes cautious, or he becomes hostile. Right? That happens very quickly, faster than conscious thinking. Now, that implicit thought is powerful. You see, it contains values, what's good, what's bad, what's bad, what's precious, what's great, It contains all these things, right? What's necessary, and you see, if the implicit thought is that such and such is necessary, then you get a felt of necessity. Now, the word necessary means it cannot be otherwise when it's unfolded, but when it's unfolded, the root is shown in the Latin word necessi, meaning don't yield, right? So, unfolded, saying it cannot be otherwise. If it cannot be otherwise, you shouldn't yield, right? You see, so the feeling of not yielding is part of the implicit thought of necessity, right?
Doesn't that get at the very core of what we talked about last year, the essence of the essence? I mean, unless we slow down and look at the genus of that, which is maintaining the self-image, no matter what the words say, that program is still going on, and it's being filtered through that. No matter how intellectual we think we are, unless we can really come to terms.
Yes, well, that's there. This implicit thought is always there. When it's made explicit, it can be made logical and so on. And it goes back that the explicit thought contributes to the implicit. See, suppose, for example, the child hears from somebody he trusts, the parents or friends, all people of that race are inferior. You see, that's a statement which is explicit in a certain logical form. Now, that then goes into implicit thought, so that if he trusts those people and believes them, and therefore he will, in the next step, he will respond that way. Perhaps if it's repeated a few times, certainly it gets stronger, right? If he sees that everybody's saying the same thing. And therefore, he doesn't know all this is happening. No, see, this is the important point. People, it's part of our culture to say, okay, you've had your explicit thought, now it's gone. It's finished, right? But it isn't. It has gone in there, and it has become active and effective. You see, especially if it has words in like all and forever, never.
The implicit order of self, it's enfolded,
Yeah.
and the time is involved with all those. It seems time is involved with those orders, and as you're talking, I get a feeling that I'm kind of unraveling or peeling off, and I feel a little sense of infantile, or when I was a child, of that there was a feeling of timelessness. There was that I had to learn these things. I can see them being conditioned and built up, and as you're talking, it's like when I don't know, but I guess it's maybe similar for other people, but when I was 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, it was like every day was new, and the sun would go down, and I thought it was still 9 in the morning, and it was like no feeling of time. But I can almost see all this happening through my conditioning.
At that point in time, you might not have been using thought to mediate the present so much, and memory was not as important. It had as much value.
Exactly.
When did we get to a point where memory became automatic?
Well, I don't know if there was any point. It just built up, you see, that step by step. I mean, first a little bit, then a little more, you see, until finally it overwhelms us, right? You know, it's like the story of the ancient story about the donkey who they put on a little bit more grain on, and then finally one bit of grain and it collapsed, right?
I mean, even as a child, we have memories of pleasant experiences, birthdays, Christmas, stuff like that. So we must have, that's time. But we just didn't have, like you say, this total confusion enough. It was someone else's confusion. At that time, we were just partaking of it till it became our own over a process.
Yes,
it seems that this feeling of timelessness, maybe it's related to compassion and love. And I'm not religious in the religious sense, but Jesus said, he was asked who's greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and he said little children, because they have a state of innocence, which is part of love.
Yeah, well, they have up to a point, I mean, but they can very easily change. You see that they can become very nasty at times. No, they sort of can shift like that.
That the little child perceives the hedge and other things, and with the implication that there was some sort of clarity.
Perceives what?
He suggested that the young child perceives the hedge or whatever I think.
Yeah.
And is it being suggested that the young child is clear?
Well, it may be clear at that level. You see, in the sense that as long as he sticks to that area, like the hedge, the trees and all that, he may be seeing them more freshly than we do. But when he starts to use words, then he gets into a terrible tangle. So
all this build up, the background or the enfolded order is not present in this child?
Well, there's some. You see, I don't say there's never a place where there's none. You see, I think it's building up. You see, he's got some, and he's capable of intense hostility and so on.
But then isn't it inevitable that he turn out the way we all have?
Well, I think unless something changes in us, he will never change, right? See, he will take his cue from the adults always, right? Because he believes that they know what they're doing, and you got to learn from them. I mean, right? And in fact, he has no choice, right? And so, therefore, he will have to take his cue from the adults. I mean, he cannot really resist the adults very far, right? Now,
there's if mom and dad has a 3-year-old child, and it's in the garden, and a dog runs down the street, the mother protects it. If it's underneath the sink eating soap, the mother protects it. That's an automatic necessity. But if little Johnny scrapes his knee and he's not hurt too bad, or the next door neighbor Susie takes his candy and the child looks at mom and cries, and mother runs to the child, protecting it, that's a different. That's given self. That's conditioning and reinforcing a self, that's the layer. That's the beginning of the layering. Or maybe not the beginning, but that's a
step.
That's a step.
Yes, well, that's the sort of thing that goes wrong. You see that it's the same as I said, the question, similar rather, the question of where do we end technical thought, and coming into the inward side, and somewhere it's got to stop, right? This thought which has a goal. Similarly, that protective thought has a limit where it shouldn't go further, right? That the parents must protect the child in certain areas, but people say overprotect, but then we say, why do parents overprotect their children? Because probably they have been raised themselves with panic and anxiety, and therefore they're responding with that same panic and anxiety and overreacting, and that's teaching the child exactly the same response. Again, you see that the child is then learning to become easily panicky and dependent and so on. So it keeps going from one generation to another.
Out of that, I think is one of the most difficult problems, what I've had with my life, and maybe it's similar with other people, in that somewhere in my development being protected from, well, life is unpredictable. It's up, it's down, it's good and bad, whatever happens. And I've been protected as a child from the downside or the bad things, and when I become a man and go into the world, I don't handle too well the negative things or the bad things. I only want the good things ahead of me. And whereas if you leave that child alone and let him find his own thing, stumble around, he'll learn that it's up and down, and he just has a natural mechanism in him to handle this.
I'm sure that's true. I mean, I read recently, I knew some woman who lived for a number of years with some primitive South American Indians, and that's the sort of approach they have. Yeah, so I think that but as civilization developed, it became necessary to teach the child certain things which it would not easily pick up by direct experience or instinct. For example, if we have electric wires, no instinct will warn the child about their danger, you see. And there are a lot of things which we have produced of that nature, and there's more and more need for that sort of education. And this, however, creates a problem, as you've pointed out. So, see, we've got, I think, though, that can only be dealt with by intelligence in each specific case. If the parent is free of these felts that are driving him or her into this overprotective behavior, or else sometimes cruel behavior, all sorts of things, right?
The outcome of that is that later in life we don't face what is in life. We make it do it, we divide it.
Yes, but I think it won't help us to go back to the child, because you see, as I said, the child will never change unless the adults change. And see, we have to begin with ourselves now. And if the older people change, the children will change. I feel confident of that now. But that's the hurdle. You see, so it's we who are the difficulty. Now the point is, because of all that happened to us as children and so on, that's true, but somehow we've got to break the cycle, you see. Now, so let's see where we are. We'll have a break in a moment. That we have this implicit or implicit thought, this enfolded thought and feeling. It's thought felt that's enfolded, because the felts are also enfolded, and they come out, you see. In other words, you suddenly pleasure or pain or anger or fear, all that stuff, right? And you can see, as you drive it, whatever you do that's happening. If you drive a car, you see you've been explicitly told, watch out for this, do that, do that. By the time you've learned it, then it just comes out in action, right? You don't have to think, right? It's necessary to have this implicit thought acting, and I want to emphasize that implicit thought is more active and more powerful than explicit thought, much more so, that it pervades our life, and that we don't see it, and we've got somehow to see something of the nature of implicit thought. So perhaps in the next hour we begin by considering, something about how implicit thought works, and then we'll go on to another kind of thought as well. So we're sort of looking at a few different kinds of thought, which are very important for the question we're considering.
As we are listening to you, what's happening at this moment, watching it, is a kind of a ripening. And what has been shaken is that absolute trust, like a to that dogmatic, to that to the authority of my thought, of the thought. But it's kind that it started, and watching it, it started at a stage of relaxation started happening, and that tension of that dogma, to the trusting the thought, it started losing. So if that happens and starts happening clearer and clearer, I'm losing that dogmatic trust to the thought, and I start to be more careful that I may maybe deceive myself, and the same thing can happen as well to myself and to the collective and to other people. But it's such a healthy feeling. All of a sudden, the tension fades.
You're not taking yourself so
And
seriously.
relaxation in how long we are. Because from the moment I arrived, there was already a tension. And start watching such a healthy, relaxing feeling, and shaking my dogmatism, because it's kind of a rigid dogmatic. I'm right, the thought is right, yeah.
You're not taking yourself so seriously.
No, I take it seriously. I'm not trusting it. It is very crooked, tricky,
David?
and it's very easily deceiving. And he may invent another recipe or another method. So once I catch the thief, then I'm more watchful.
Yes, well, let's say that thought becomes more slow and hesitant. It's got to slow down, right? You can get a look at it, and with something perhaps more than thought and attention, you see, and and we perhaps come to that the thought begins to be more suspended. You're not committed to it. You see, you're not believing it, you say. You're not disbelieving it or believing it, but you're not acting from it. You see, it's sort of slowed down and suspended and not committed to it, so you can begin to become aware of what's going on.
And heat comes. I mean, the body watching, the kind of a heat that warms up my feet, my hands.
It's enervating. It is. It's
refreshing.
Yeah. Verb.
Okay, well that sounds very good. I think good. Maybe we should now have the break and have 10 minutes, right? That means 15 of it. Yes, well, we've been talking about implicit thought and the fact that it brings in everything, right? And it sort of shades off into feelings and into the body and into perhaps some level beyond that of subtlety, feeling and intelligence, and and in that implicit thought there may be a lot of confusion, and which is very much due to the society. You see, our general implicit thoughts are the most important ones. Like the implicit thought of what sort of person you should be, or how you should behave, or what your ideals are, or your values are, and you just respond that way. You see, it's interesting to study this, that the general is the most active. You see, in ordinary life, the particular is the main thing. You see, if ordinarily we say this. This chair is whatever you want to say, has metal here, right? And you see, that's a typical statement we make, which is what? You point to the object by the word this, right? That points, it's a kind of thought that points beyond thought, right? It points to the actual thing, right? The word this is both, in some sense, thought and not thought, right? Now, then we say this, this chair, that's a particular thing. It could be more general, a piece of furniture, you see, and so on. An object, a material object, and so on. It could be part of a more general class, right? And we have this chair, is metal. Now we say metal is now the general. You see, metal is something very general in this context, right? Because all kinds of things could be of metal. It's this chair which has metal, right? So it's the two things together, the three things together, this individual object, actually there, the particular quality of it being a chair we're focusing on now, and the general is metal, right? And you could turn it around, because you could, it depends on how you want to emphasize. You could say this metal object is a chair, right? In that case, it's being a metal is particular, and the chair being a chair is general, right? It depends on how the context, how you do that. But that's a very, now usually we think that this is the most concrete, then the particular is the next step of being a bit abstract, and general is more abstract, right? Like saying more, if we went away, this chair is a piece of furniture, you see. So furniture seems more abstract than chair, right? Less substantial, and so on. And you could go on, putting it in more general classes, right? So now, when it comes to thought, however, it may work the other way, that the general is the most concretely active. Like saying, whenever you use the word all, if you say all people of a certain group are such and such, are bad or good, is a very general statement, right? That's implicit, because you learned it as a child, and somebody told you, you figured it out for yourself, and then it went into the unconscious mind, whatever that is, into the memory. And then along comes somebody, you say, I recognize this person is a member of that group, right? Particularly, this particular person. Now, then immediately the general thought flashes into operation, saying he's inferior. All of those are inferior, therefore this one is inferior. It's very logical. And therefore you immediately sense him as inferior, you react as if you were inferior, or dangerous or whatever, you're frightened. You're cautious, you're disliking. Your whole chemistry is affected by this thought, right? Now, this general thought is the active thing. You see, the particular functions as the button which operates the general, right? Now, you see, therefore, but we, not knowing this, we tend to think our problems are particular. Saying, my problem is that I have trouble with this person, you see. But in fact, the problem is the general thought behind it, right? Which will make you have trouble with all people like that. And see, for example, children may form general conclusions, like saying, having a traumatic experience, they would say all things of that kind are bad or dangerous. All food of that kind is bad. And then seeing anything that looks like that kind of food, they may feel nauseated, right? It's the same sort of thing. They're saying, if they have trouble with their parents, they say, my parents are always mistreating me, and they don't only mean these parents, but they mean everybody. The thought takes the form, those people who are in that role are mistreating me, right? It doesn't say these particular people are mistreating me. And therefore, whenever somebody takes a similar role, you will get a similar emotional reaction, right? So as they grow older, they get an endless series of problems with the father figure, the mother figure, right? And they don't see where it's coming from. It's coming from the general implicit thought, right? Now, you may try to solve it as a particular problem, saying, I have trouble with this person. I've got to try to stop it. But it's no use if the general thought, which is closer to the source of the stream, is pouring in pollution, you see. All right? So you've got to get to the general thought if you're going to, the one which really works if you're going to get at these problems, right? You see, there are all sorts of general thoughts, and I wonder if people might see. I don't know if you...
There must be even more larger generalities behind this implicit order in thought that gives the energy to the general implicit order that moves to the specific. There must be something behind that
Yes, it may be further behind. You see, there's something more general, you see, saying all, whatever is always true, what is altogether good, what is always right, what is all wrong.
Like all these general feelings of prejudice and fear and desire and stuff like that must rise out of a feeling that I am, or there is something to protect, or there is a entity there which makes these generalities valid.
Yes, well, behind it all is I, who is always there, and always the source of value, right?
That was a larger generality.
Well, it was functioning as more general, you see, saying I becomes the general thing which is always behind every experience, right?
But also in thought, there must be a more implicate kind of thought that may not be polluted, but is the root that thought operates out of. I mean, thought must be a process that isn't necessarily corrupt in itself. It's just that the conditioning and the content of thought is general order.
Well, things have gone wrong in this whole process. This process could be right or it could be wrong, right? But it has gone wrong over the past history. It's gone wrong among in society and among people. And you see, you can get thoughts more and more general until you come to the thought of all, right? Now, the thought of all is the most general and the most powerful, right? See, what is always true, you see, the words always and all and forever, never have tremendous emotional power, right? The word necessary has the same effect, right? Don't yield. Never, if it's absolutely necessary, never yield. And it's a tremendous emotional, physical effect. And you see, popular songs used to have words like always, forever, never, in order to produce a powerful emotional impact, right? See, so these are the words which are the most general words in thought. They're also used in mathematics, you see, as proving that this is always true or this is not always true or whatever. You see, because mathematics aims at some proof of necessity, right? And whereas ordinarily we have what's called contingency, which is the opposite of necessity. It means it can be otherwise. And there's a different impact of contingency and necessity, you see. So you see, all these thoughts have a tremendous impact. Even those who don't know anything about logic or who regard themselves as non-intellectual types are profoundly affected by this sort of thought.
It goes to process.
Well, I was going to say, as soon as we have the feeling of necessity, we really overstepped ourselves, no matter what we're talking about.
Well, if it's absolute necessity. It may be relative necessity, saying it's limited by some contingency, right? We say it's necessary in a certain context, it could change, right?
Everything is based on that because it goes back to axioms and postulates in mathematics. It goes back to theories in physics. It's the same thing.
Yeah. You see, so therefore, what we do with concepts of necessity and always and forever will have a tremendous effect on how thought operates. But our society says otherwise, right?
That feeling of necessity doesn't feel relative. In other words, if I feel that this is necessary, that feeling is absolute.
It seems absolute, and you see, we have to work out how we can come to terms with this necessity, because there is an area where we need it, right? We must say it's necessary to eat, you see, necessary to get food, it's necessary to do all sorts of things. And at the same time, this necessity can sort of distort the thought process. And we see that's a point we have got to work on and get clear, right?
Or what we are saying is so necessary that's the problem, not that we say something is necessary.
Well, somehow something goes wrong wherever we get to the absolute, you see. Whether it's necessity or always or true or forever or, wonderful or great or good or perfect or... These all words have the same effect, right? And they overwhelm the system. You see, they produce a supreme value. You see, we have to have values are priorities. The thing which has higher value is what you give greater priority to. If it's absolute truth or absolute necessity or something, it has first absolute priority, supreme. You may say God has supreme value, you see. or you may say the state has supreme value, or your own ambitions have it, or whatever. But whatever gets supreme value mobilizes the system and drives it with total energy, right? Now we need that total energy, but it can also be driven in a wrong way.
Use that as well for emotional manipulation.
What?
To this method, that thought, that necessity can distort the process, the thought process, that probably has been studied and then has been used, that method, to manipulate the crowd, and we saw that in the last politics.
Yes, well, you see it all the time. Yeah, you see it all the time. I mean, the point is that those people who carry the most emotional impact are those who communicate that sense of absolute necessity. They use the words all, it's very powerful. Hitler did, he's saying all Jews are no good. You see, the Reich will last for 1,000 years. He meant, really, emotionally, it meant forever, right? You see, now the word forever carries an impact tremendous, you see. And if you really take it seriously. And we used to have a statement, as a child, forever and a day. Sort of making fun of it, right? So we have this generality, necessity, and implicit, especially it takes place in implicit thought, right? And carries very powerful emotional, neurophysiological, chemical effects. Your whole chemistry can be affected by it. Now, you see, like, if you remember Edgar Allan Poe's poem about the raven, say, quote, the raven nevermore. See, it meant that whatever was good, it's all gone forever, right? So that produced a tremendous emotional impact, even as a poem, which you didn't believe is true, you see. But if you believed it to be true, then the impact would be enormous, right? Now, so I'm trying to emphasize that the way we think about certain things has a hidden structure and implicit, and it affects the whole way the process works, you see. Now, we therefore have to inquire some more. Now, I wanted to go to a couple of other kinds of thought. That a great deal of our thought is what we could call literal thought. It aims to state literally what is, saying this is just what it is, and what I say, it is what I think it is, right? Right? I'm trying to say technical thought aims to be literal. Then we have poetic thought, which doesn't aim to be literal. It may be metaphorical or various other things. It's more ambiguous, right? Literal thought aims to be unambiguous. It may not succeed, but it aims that way, to know this is exactly what it is. And for technical purposes, this literal thought has been enormously developed, but we use it also in many other ways. We carry it over into areas where perhaps it doesn't work, right? Like in the areas I've been describing, saying, all people of this race are such and such, that is taken literally, right? See, statements about all tend to be taken literally, where in fact there's no foundation for them. You see, you don't know about all. You only know some, right? But still, you take that all to be literally so, and that has a tremendous effect. Now, this literal thought, you see, has been compared to idol worship. You see, if you make an idol, it may stand in for some force, which is greater than some spiritual energy, right? At first, but gradually the idol is taken to be actually it, right? Literally, and therefore you give supreme value to that object, right? You see how it goes. That taking literal thought can lead to, when wrongly applied, can lead to very destructive consequences, right? Now, you see, we could say in a way that insofar as our words claim to be, our thoughts claim to be, descriptions or statements about reality just as it is, we are giving them too high a value. We're sort of worshiping them, right? Because it cannot do that, you see. all our thoughts are, they cover some of it, but they don't cover all, right? Now, see, now we say poetic thoughts may communicate some sort of truth while being less literal, but there's some anthropologists who claim there's a still more fundamental form of thought which was common in primitive times, and they call that participatory thought. What? It could be mythology, but also more things. You see, mythology could be looked at as poetic or as participatory. Now, yes. Now, see, let's take a case that you could say these people may have what are called totems, certain animals with which they're identified, right? So what they say, the thought goes something like this, that they and the totem are participating together in some sort of energy, right? Spirit, right? Or it could even say that all of existence is participating in a universal spirit or matter, like so now that they of course probably also had literal thought for certain practical purposes. It doesn't mean that they hadn't heard of literal thought, but they used participatory thought quite a bit. Now so let's see this now. What does this word mean, participation? It means, to take part, really. That is, it has two meanings. In the earliest meaning, it meant to partake of, as you partake of food, right? See, people all eating from the common bowl or whatever, partaking of something, bread or whatever it is. It was symbolically, not even symbolically, perhaps to them it actually meant partaking of this source, right? And also they felt that the totem and they themselves partook of this energy, right? Somebody here elsewhere said, somebody elsewhere they were partaking of this flame, you see. This created a sense of oneness, right? It was not, on the other hand, we see that literal thought tends to break things up and says, insofar as you say each thought stands in for that thing itself, then another thing has another thought means another thing, and therefore it suggests two different things, right? So literal thought tends to analyze and break it up, and then it puts it together, of course, in various ways, but that's the way it goes.
Is this participating thought? I haven't got that straight. Is this participating with?
First of all, to partake of, like partaking of the spirit of the meeting, right? The other would be to take part in, to make your contribution. These are the two meanings.
What were they participating with? Each other or some other greater?
Well, it depends. I don't know how much they thought they were participating in. The earlier meaning emphasized partaking of, right? And then that meaning persisted until the Middle Ages. But the other meaning was there, but it was a minor meaning. But in modern times, the other meaning has taken the major meaning, which is to take part in, right? To make your contribution, which means, however, you are accepted in there, and it is sort of, you are being taken into the whole at the same time, right? You can't take part in something unless that thing sort of accepts your participation. So
that taking off, does that is related to a very fresh feeling of being related?
Yes, that's
maybe that primitive partaking of. It comes. It's born out of that fresh feeling of not even being conscious of, but being related to the other.
Yes, that's what I was trying to get to. That if you feel that you are, say, all the tribe is partaking of something together with the totem, they feel they're all, in some sense, they're all one. You see. Now, if you feel all nature is partaking of the universal spirit, then it makes you feel one with everything, right? Now, at the same time, you may be taking part in it. They realize you're doing something, but and that way of thinking does not create a separation of object and subject. And it would create, as implicit thought, it would create a sense, a feeling of being together, right? That the boundaries are not really separations, right? But they're there for, they're there for descriptive purposes. Now,
Does this participatory thought use words, use concepts the same as Lutheran
well,
thought?
they may use. I haven't looked into it enough, but they do use some words, obviously, when they talk about it. And there is a kind of concept, but it's much less well. It does not claim to be a literal standing in for the thing. You see, you see that that way of thinking. You see another example, not exactly the same, but it might be illuminating. I remember a program on television where somebody was living with the Eskimos as they were hunting the seal. And he said that they did not regard the seal, at least in the traditional, by now they've all changed, but I mean originally, they did not regard the seal, the different seals, as different separate seals. They said there was one seal, the spirit of the seal, who manifested in different places and times. And they would pray to the spirit of the seal to manifest in order to feed them, right? Now, you see, that is very different from our modern way of thinking, right? Now, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's a different way. It will produce a greater sense of oneness with the seal. You see, you may say we are the seal, you must say that the spirit of the seal is in some sense, we are participating somehow, right?
In a certain sense, would tribalism, patriotism, or some religious rituals be participatory thought?
They could be, and you see, there's danger in participatory thing. I'm not saying it has some very nice aspects and some dangerous aspects and some aspects that are very inadequate, you see. So I think let's just look at it. We're not trying to glorify it, but just see the difference, right?
Well, aren't all these rituals and traditions that have been perpetuated for hundreds of years, the way it came about, that kind of thinking?
Well, it's been, yes, it's in rituals, it's in, but people may have lost the meaning of the rituals. They began to do it mechanically, you see. Right? Now, but it was implicit in the rituals, and a few people may have understood it, you see, but you can see that it was the common, see, it was used a lot by Aristotle. It was the common way of thinking during the Middle Ages, as late as that, where I remember reading that, say somebody like Thomas Aquinas used that idea of participation constantly, and said, see, for example, he would say that the subject of the sentence participates the object, like saying if the subject is the chair, participates the quality of metal, right? It partakes of it. And he would say that the light we see on the earth participates the sun. Say that it's there in the pure quality in the sun, and it's partaking of it here, right? You see, that's a way of thinking which has been common over a tremendous part of our human development, and we should really sort of get the flavor of it, right?
A mutual kind of thing.
What?
It's a mutual kind of thing.
Yeah, now that way of thinking would not lead anybody to plunder the planet, you see. Because we're...
It partakes of the grass.
Yeah, we are partaking of the planet, and to plunder it would be absurd, right? So it has, it really is part of us. See, so deep down in the unconscious, it must be part of us all, because the human race has had, say, 1 million years of that, and say a comparatively short time of this literal thought being dominant, right?
Flowing in and out. Would you say? Kind of.
Yeah, it's flowing in and out. It's like unfolding and flowing, and you see, therefore everything partakes of everything. Its very being partakes of it. You see, it does not have an independent being, right? It's the same as to say we are nourished by the earth. You see, suppose we say food, you partake of food, literally. Now, that food, which looks like a separate object, becomes you, right? Where does it become you? You see, how can it become you, right? At what stage, where do you draw the line? You see, something must be wrong with that way of looking at it.
Fragmentation would be the opposite of participation.
Yes, that's the literal thought tends to fragment. the participatory thought tends to bring it all together, right? Now,
So could you say that you might have a group of, or something that has a participatory type feeling, but then to make it exclusive, they fragmented?
yes, what happened was it got into fragmentation because they were not able to include the other tribe, for example, in their participation. You see, it broke down at that point, and they began fragmentary thinking by thinking. For example, some tribes have the word for human being is the same as the word for that member of the tribe, and therefore meeting another tribe, the very word suggested they weren't human. And they might know in some sense they are, but the power of these words is enormous. It's in that pool of implicit thought, so that you may consciously say, okay, I know they're human, but unconsciously it's working, right?
So maybe the food was not enough at a certain period in history. They had to kill the other tribe and keep the food for themselves. So that right away the thought made an assumption that there is a division.
Well, I think a lot of things went wrong with participatory thought. You see, one of them was what I said, tribalism. Now, you see, for example, cannibalism is a form of participatory thought, a very primitive form, right? You see, they got the idea, well, let's really participate. I'll partake of you, right? You see, so... you see, now, they didn't do it on purpose to be bad or something. It's just the way thought goes. It goes, somebody may get this idea and it takes hold and there it is, right? It becomes the custom, you see. And you see, also all sorts of magic came up. At first you think magic is basically a form of participatory thought, right? Saying we all participate, and therefore my word participates in the thing participates in me, so we can affect it by just thinking about it, right? Now, there's white magic and gray magic and black magic. You see, some magic became very unpleasant, you see, very destructive in its intention, voodoo and all that, and they could kill you so by participation. You see, it had a lot of negative effects, and besides that, technically it was rather ineffective, you see. It was not very helpful to think that way when we really wanted to do something technically. You would really want more literal thought.
It's still going on. There is participatory thought now.
Oh, yes.
Going on right now.
In the room, and also in the whole society.
Right.
You see, people do fall into participatory thought without noticing it, but it often is destructive now because it's rather limited, right?
Well, that's the first thing that my mind wants to question is, this participatory thought sounds so, like, feel wonderful, we're all feeling good together, feel one, the whole New Age thing or whatever. And then where does it happen that it starts getting into this?
Well, I think that the trouble comes because it does not establish the right relation to literal thought. You see, people had to develop literal thought for technical purposes. They didn't need very much in say, 500,000 years ago of literal thought, right? They were living in small groups of 20 to 40 hunter-gatherers, and they knew each other and so on. But then later came the agricultural revolution for reasons unknown, and people got into larger societies. They needed much more organization and order and technology, and they had to use a lot more literal thought, right? And they had to organize society by saying, you belong here, you do this, you do that. You see, they began, therefore, to treat everything as a separate object, and including other people. They use them as means to an end, right? See, literal thought is used in developing the notion of a means to an end, without which we could never develop technology of any kind, right? Or any large-scale agriculture or anything of that kind. So the point is that the further civilization went, the more you were into this area of using thought as a means to an end, thinking literally, and cutting down participation, right? But still, people wanted participation at the same time, right? There was no way, it was hard. They tried perhaps to participate symbolically, ritualistically, religiously, or they participated in their tribe and their country. But then technical thought got in the relationship between countries. You treated the other country as an object, right? Which was to be controlled or fought over or defeated or something, right? You see, there was a constant spread of practical, technical thought, that form of thought, into more and more areas. the participation itself became fragmentary, and it receded into, it withdrew into a more limited area, which got more and more limited all the time. You see, so perhaps people might have had it in the family or in certain places, but in certain rituals or in the sense of the city or the country or the religion or God. But more and more things were going on which were worldly, as they said. You see, even in the Middle Ages, there was still a lot of participatory thought, right? If you take the cathedral at Chartres or similar cathedrals, you can see that it was really aimed at participation in the infinite. And also, I'm told that the people who built it were very participatory, that all people from the lowest peasants to the highest nobles came and worked on it and did physical work on it, right? They all participated, right? So the...
It seems to me that time and again in the course of this discussion, a sense comes up of where do you draw the line between participation and the other. And it seems to suggest that there might be some sort of orientation that draws that line. For example, even in what's taking place here, there might be some orientation which points to a line. I don't know if that's very clear.
Yeah, well, somewhere we've got to discuss the distinction between them. And as the same as we said before about time, use of time and so on, that it's not clear how you can draw that distinction, because to some extent we need literal thought even internally, and to some extent we need participatory thought outwardly. You see that we can't draw the line all that clearly, and then we have to learn what I think what we need to do is to understand more deeply what's going on as to why we're getting into this trouble. You see, we do not have a clear notion of these two forms of thought and how they relate. You see, what are they more deeply? Yeah.
Better to look at it as all part of a continuum.
Somehow there's a deeper continuum, you see, which we haven't got to. You see.
We've gotten totally skewed in one direction on the continuum more
Yeah.
than actually happened.
Well, sometimes we jump to one end of it, and sometimes we jump to the other. You see, but that won't do. Right?
Politics is about the epitome of participating thought.
It should be anyway.
Advertising,
What?
advertising, and all that commercialism.
Well, it's gone wrong, you see, but politics would have to be participatory no matter what you do, you see, but in both senses that we partake of and take part in, right?
That's religions and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, but not only negative things, but positively it should be that way, you see, that in order to engage in politics properly, we would have to have a very participatory attitude, right? We can't engage in it as separate atoms, all literally defined separately and all that, right? So, you see, in order to form goals or purposes or values which everybody can work together with, we have got to have this participatory thought. You can't impose them, you can't just define them and say that's it, right? Literally. So, it's got to develop in the whole process.
Would you say that alienation is the opposite of participation?
Yes, it's the extreme of this thought which is literal and separative and manipulative, right? It becomes, the word manipulative is a pejorative significance, but see, we begin with thought which aims toward an end, and manipulation is one of those things, but we could say that when it reduces only to manipulation with no real purpose behind it, then it's very empty, right? Whereas if the end is in view of something greater, which arises in the participation, then it's different. You see, the end is absorbed into something greater, right?
Scientists participate in discovering the literal.
What?
That's it. Perhaps scientists participate in discovering the literal.
It's very participatory science. You see, it could not exist otherwise. And the point is now that if science is working right, then everybody is taking part, making his contribution, but everybody is partaking of the whole thing, right? Yeah. He can't begin unless he does that. And therefore, if it's working right, nobody's worried about his ego or anything. He's just doing what he can and learning it all. And now, however, all this other stuff has come in. You see, saying you've got to get credit for what you do. You've got to get a job. You've got to make money. You've got to become well known. You've got to fit in with the consensus in the scientific community and so on. You see, So it gets distorted, right? And it becomes more individualized, the participation becomes more and more restricted. You see, just as it does in every other phase of society. But see, actually, this participation is absolutely necessary if anything is to be done, right, collectively. And but it isn't working right because it's muddled up with this other kind of thought. You see, for example, when you organize any sort of bureaucracy or hierarchy, you are treating people as objects, right? Saying they've got to do this and this and this and be related in that way. It's fixed. So, therefore, you have literal thought saying this person is known by his function. He is whatever, whatever you call him, right? A worker or a banker or this or that. And it is defined, right? So that sets up the social hierarchy and so on. And therefore, they're isolated from each other. The participation is very limited, right? So so you have this problem that you have the subject, you have the object, right? The world is made of objects. Literally, we have thoughts standing in for them, concepts. And we treat other people as objects, and eventually you must treat yourself as an object, right? Saying, I must fit in here, and I must do this, and be that, and become better, and so on.
Isn't that so? It's always fragmentary.
Yes, it's always fragmentary.
We always can think about one thing at a time.
Well, no. I think this participatory thought brings in everything, but without claiming to be a literal picture of the thing. You see, it's quite different. It cannot. It does not literally describe the thing, but it creates a sense of participation. You see that if we say, for example, we may look at ourselves as a group here. You see, everybody being different, right? Now we can also say perhaps participation is taking place, right? Which means everybody is partaking of whatever is going on, and also he may be making a contribution, right? Now, so even if you don't make a visible contribution, it's still partaking and so on, and taking part in some way. So now I'm saying that's the way I've used some thought to describe that. I'm saying, but if the reality which corresponds to that thought comes into being, then we have something else, right? You see, if we were to use literal thought, saying, you are here, I am there, you know this, I know that, you belong here, you have such and such qualifications, I have them, and so on, we defined it all, then the participation gets more limited, right?
Is that a state of being which is beyond thought?
Well, I think this is a movement that way. You see, that if we make an absolute jump and say either we're in thought or not in thought, then you get in trouble because you say, how am I to reach it, you see?
The experience of participation. Everyone's participating whether they like it or not.
Yes.
But the experience of it.
The awareness of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're calling attention to it, right?
Awareness. Awareness is a state beyond thought, is it?
Well, but we're using thought at the same time. You see, if we say, here we have thought, and then there we have awareness, which has nothing to do with thought, then we have no way of going from one to the other. And we then form the goal, how will I become aware, right? And I start to get into this same problem as always. How will I get there, you see? I have the other side of the stream, and I've got to get across. And this side of the stream is thought, that side is awareness. I've got to find a boat, right, which is the means to the end. You see, but there is no boat, you see, and there's no stream. There's nothing separating us.
Awareness may be more like participation than anything else.
Yes, it's part of participation. You see, we can't participate without being aware, clearly.
But the way thought works, it turns awareness into an object which we literally have to.
Yeah, that's the point. The word awareness is given a literal meaning. You got the point exactly, right? You see, now, we could give it a metaphorical meaning, and then people would say, well, that's only poetry, you see. But I'm trying to say, we've got to go further and say that it's a different way of using language to say awareness is not something which we say, there it is, literally, but rather it's all together, participating, right? The awareness is only a term which arises in describing it, but it is not anything which is actually there separately.
Awareness would be a state of not dividing, whereas thinking is always dividing.
Well, no, we're trying to say participatory thought doesn't divide. See, I'm claiming that thinking, literal thought is what divides, and participatory thought doesn't have to divide.
We're saying that basically all that we've been defining here in the last few hours is the difficulty in that thought has become so literal, and it even operates the body through feelings and stuff, and that it's sort of like become a concrete kind of a thing, and it takes itself literally, and it's its literal ness that is causing the problem.
Yes, this literal thought produces a form of idol worship, you see. We worship the images which that thought produces, right? You see, now, I'm saying this is a suggestion to think about it. See, I'm not saying it's true or false, but we are here participating in a communication. I'm saying consider it and look at it. Don't make up your mind. Here, this is another way of looking at it, to say there's literal thought which divides, and there may be another kind of thought which doesn't divide.
But this division of thought leads to the self. I think, therefore I am. Without thought there is no self.
Well, we're going to be in trouble then, because we'll have to ask if everybody feels, most people feel that there is a self, how will they ever change? You see, we say it becomes a goal to try to get rid of the self.
But the self is based on this illusion that we are divided, that life is divided, and I'm different from you. I'm divided from you and from the animals and everything.
But I would prefer not to call it an illusion, you see. I would say that it's simply carrying a certain kind of thought too far. You see, division is necessary as a way of thinking. Otherwise, we would not be able to begin to produce any of the things that are here.
I would say differences are necessary, but not division, not psychological division.
Well, no, I'm saying division in general is necessary. You have to divide up all sorts of objects. You see.
Differentiate between...
Well, no, but we actually, what's the difference? You see, we have to see them as separate, right? You see, we see these objects as separate. This is not me, you see. This is not the chair. Literal thought works that way. It says this is what it is, and there's everything else that it isn't, right?
This literal thought, I'm thinking it even looks at awareness in a literal way, like visual awareness.
That's right. It takes it literally, and that's too fixed, right? Too limited.
Awareness is an individual. I think of my awareness.
Yes, or you think awareness is different from something else like attention, right? Or thought, or they're all together. You see, now it's all enfolded together. You see, I'm saying there's another way to think about it, which you can experiment with.
Are you saying maybe that participatory thought is there to begin with?
Yeah.
And then. But if literal thought is there, we can't experience the.
Well, if we have too much literal, if it goes too far, we can't. It covers it up, right?
Yeah. Now we're trying to bring participatory thought into being, but rather we're trying to see the nature of literal thought.
That's right, and its relation to participatory thought. We haven't got that clear yet.
Is participatory thought more fluid?
Well, much more, yes.
Is memory still a factor?
Yes, it's still there. It's still there, but it's not. It's more fluid. I'm not saying that participatory thought is the answer to everything. You see, it has its troubles. You see, we have to get beyond both of them.
Participatory thought is like an undivided wholeness, whereas the literal
Yeah.
thought is it is divided. It is a part.
It is divided, and there is a place for it. And we have to see the relation. Participatory thought by itself is not the answer. We went through it and said the primitive people who had it still had some bad features, right? It's not a perfect answer to everything. But somehow we have to go further and say, how are these two related? There's something that will lead us to the question of something beyond both, right?
But to be aware of differences is not psychological division. In a moment I see the differences and I like this and don't like that, then I start psychologically to divide.
Yeah,
but that isn't necessary just to be aware of differences.
Yes, what I wanted to say, we'll discuss it later, you see, but that the use of literal thought about ourselves is what makes us do that.
If I start to participate in this dialogue, and I and participating, and I feel that I'm participating from insight, I may not be looking at what's actually going on. I might be participating from some sense of anxiety about what's actually happening and trying to slow the process down because I'm fixed. I'm not fluid, but I am talking as though I am, right?
Well, we can always fool ourselves about it. You see, I'm just saying what it would be if it were working right, and it may not be working right. You see that as long as we have all that anxiety and so on, participatory thought is not going to work very well. We are participating, but in a very confused way, right? But I think that's a good point to end because you're supposed to be at the lunch at 12:15.